This will be interactive, so I do have slides, but I'm hoping that someone walks away, one, encouraged about what opportunities are available in the federal government. One, possibly reassured, because I know that it's very difficult in federal contracting, and it oftentimes can seem like such a daunting task, trying to tackle how to find opportunities in the federal government. And lastly, I just want you to be transparent, right? If there are challenges that you face, if there are things that you have to endure, feel free to let me know, right? Because I understand how tremendously difficult it is to be a small business owner. Um, I always say my dad was a small business owner. He had his own construction company. And one thing, there's a couple things that I kind of learned from my dad. The first one is kind of funny, but the first one is I knew that I didn't want to be in the construction industry if it involved doing roofing in the summer in the Eastern Shore of Maryland. Because between the mosquitoes and the intense heat of the summer, I knew that wasn't a role for me. So it helped to shape me and gave me the influence that I needed to make sure that I got my good office job, right? But I think the other thing that I remember very vividly is when it was proposal time. And I always knew because he came home a little earlier than he would normally. In the construction world, you know, the sun's up, you're working. Sun comes down, you're cleaning up and you're on your way home. But I remember oftentimes the kitchen table would be empty, right? My mom was very much into tidiness. And she would say tidiness is next to godliness, so she always kept it tidy. But I remember I knew it was proposal time because there would be papers strewn about on the kitchen table, and my dad sitting there uh, with this anxious look on his face, looking at all these papers before him, trying to make sense of them, trying to determine the path forward. I always remember that because I always say, so the state of Maryland at the time had these incentive programs to include small minority disadvantaged businesses, but for some reason, my dad was never included in that, right? In the programs that were carved out, um, although well intended, it never worked for him, right? And subsequently, he ended up closing his business after maybe 2 decades of running strong. But I think after a while, you've probably either have felt this way or maybe currently feeling this way, where you're feeling a little tired, a little worn down. And I think that's what happened. So now I say that there's an opportunity for me to make sure that other small businesses aren't sitting around the kitchen table with their onlooking kids trying to figure things out, that I try to give you the tools to help you to be successful. Because one last thing that I will say about my dad is it takes tremendous courage to start a small business. Um, you have to either be, I've heard someone say this before, you either have to be crazy or really courageous to start a business. And the reason why I know that's true is because, you know, the traditional, just use my dad as an example, right? So my dad grew up in what we could probably consider a sharecropper's home, right? And so there were 16 people living in one house, and they didn't even have a bathroom. I learned what a chamber pot is, and if you don't know what a chamber pot is, you can look it up. It's not the most glamorous home by any stretch of the imagination, but that's where he grew up. 16 people in a 3-room house, and you know the things that he's been able to see and been able to do really all became of entrepreneurship. I have an uncle whose name is also Calvin, who for years and years and years worked factory jobs like everybody else, right? You grow up, and when you get out graduate when you leave school at 8th grade, most people didn't finish. At that time, he died at 92. Most people didn't go to school, and so 8th grade was the pinnacle of education, and then you're gonna need to go out and work because you got to help everybody else, right? And so my uncle, great uncle, learned a skill of operating a crane. And this guy that he worked for, I don't know, maybe 15 years or so, said to him, "Hey, you know what? I'm walking away from the business. What if I give you this crane?" And of course, my uncle, uh, Uncle Calvin, was a very comical guy, but also a very humble guy. And knowing he couldn't afford it and didn't know what strings were attached, he declined. And the guy was persistent that there's no strings attached. I want this to make money for you in the way that was what I was able to make money from it. And my uncle took it. And he tells the story that he remembers earning a penny a day to getting $100 an hour by operating it, right? So I think it's always good to remind people, like, why are you here? Why did you do this? Why did you start your consulting business, your education business? Why did you start this? What brought you to this place? Because it's always good to remind yourself of where you've been before you launch into the future. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Calvin Mitchell. I am the now acting director of the Office of Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization. Uh, I am, I was moved, promoted, whatever word you want to insert there, to the senior procurement executive here at the Department of Education, which probably was the most impactful thing that could have happened to me, because now all the barriers that I've seen from a procurement standpoint, I'm able to now influence how our procurements can reduce barriers for small businesses. And so it's a fortunate. It's funny because sometimes you don't realize how sometimes what happens to you impacts others. And I have to say that that's exactly what's going to happen, because I'm going to be able now to be able to give opportunities in ways that we never have done before. Really challenge some of the assumptions of incumbency that we've held for so long, and so it's a great opportunity. My background is in contracting. Um, Grew up as a contracting specialist at Picatinny Arsenal in New Jersey. And then from there, I decided to move closer to home. So I ended up coming down um, to the Baltimore, D.C. area, where I started working with the Corps of Engineers. The Corps of Engineers really took me to a couple of different places in terms of work experience and learning contracts, and ultimately took me to the Corps of Engineers headquarters, where I was developing policy, doing compliance, and building programs. And so that was really interesting and fascinating. And then I was able to go over to Army Geospatial Center, which is a part of the Army Corps of Engineers, where I was able to get back into service contracting and really identify ways that I could really help and lead that organization. And then from there, I was just done with being a contracting professional, right? And so from there, I moved over to General Service Administration, where I was able to get a really interesting job where I worked with other agencies on procurement, and really talked to them about what GSA offered or what are some things that we could do better. And then I got an opportunity to come here to work for a friend and a mentor, Janet Scott, who recently retired after close to 40 years of federal government service. She brought me on, and I was the deputy director of contracting here. And I had high hopes of trying to figure out how to fill her seat, right, and fill her shoes. But sometimes there's other plans that are for you. And subsequently, the Office of Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization opened up. Janet Scott was the previous director, and she said, Calvin, I think you should try for this position because you care about businesses, you care about what you're doing, and you would advocate for them. And so subsequently, I went for it and I got it, and I love the job. I absolutely immerse myself in the lives of the small businesses in which we're trying to do business with us, because that is, in my mind, the only way that we really would be able to really understand what the market could bear. And so, as such, I'm from that position, I moved to where I am now. I'm still the OSDBU director, acting, but I'm also the senior procurement executive now here at the department, and really excited. So, if I'm gonna really take this from, I want to speak to all participants in the audience. So, if you are an experienced contractor, and you know the government work really well, I think there's going to be a place for you, and there's going to be some things for you. But if you're new to this space, I'm going to try to avoid using acronyms to the greatest extent possible and walk slowly so that we can walk together, and so that everybody can get something out of what we have today. So, let's see. All right. I guess I should turn off the teams. Okay. So, what is the Office of Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization? A lot of times, I have to stop. I have to stop and make sure that everyone knows that this resource is there. I think the federal government contracting is one of few places where your success is a pivotal part of most agencies. And I say that because the Small Business Act says specifically that there has to be a Office of Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization. Sometimes if you're at NASA or DOD, they call them Army, they call them small business programs. But every agency who adheres to the Small Business Act, which is everybody basically. There's very rare, limited instances where not everybody is accountable to this small business statute. Has this office, Section 15K, and this office works as an advocate to maximize participation for small businesses in department contracts. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. But you have to know what this office is and that every agency has it, right? And it might look different, right? So we have one OSDBU office here. If you go to HHS, they're much bigger. So not only do you have Shannon Jackson at HHS, Health and Human Services, you will also have maybe Indian Health Services, you'll have someone, or perhaps NIH, National Institute of Health. You'll have Ms. Scarborough, right? So even at some of the subsidiary agencies or subcomponent agencies, you will see that there is small business advocates, and it's important. And now I'm going to go through and walk through what this office is. And again, I know if you are well seasoned, this may be old news, but hold on tight as we make sure that we all bring each other up, as we all bring this together and kind of tie this in a knot. So the OSDBU office should be someone who always picks up the phone. Now, I may understand that there are some that may not, but I will say that I think in most cases, They should pick up the phone, and they should be the ones picking up and answering emails, because they are responsible for advocating for your success. There's not a lot of places where you have people who are advocating for your success, right? My small team is doing just that, right? And every small team, I should say, every agency has a team that is supposed to be doing that, right? This is supposed to be what what they're supposed to do. And the Small Business Administration, SBA, has what's called procurement scorecards. These procurement scorecards give agencies grades on how well they're doing with the small business programs. And oftentimes, people tend to focus on the actual grade. So, for instance, we get an A. That doesn't really matter to me, because we're only doing 17% small business. Until I'm doing 100% small business, then I think I would be able to tout, right? Even when we were doing 30% small business, right? I still don't think that's a lot of much of a victory lap to make, because there's so much more opportunity within the realm of contracts that are out there. But I just want to give you a little snapshot of kind of what these offices do, so you know the resources that are available to you, right? Outreach to the community, right? So my team, we try to go to as many events as possible. The only thing that generally limits us is either resources, and which is money, or just time, right? Sometimes if there's multiple ones. But I'm telling my team, we need to be out. We need to be in the community. We need to get the message out to everyone about what we're doing here at the department, so that people can know how to compete on our contracts. Building relationships just to support small business participation. I was talking to Yasmin earlier. There's so many different organizations. There's WIP, Women Impact in Public Policy for women-owned small businesses. There's the 8A Association for the Small Disadvantaged Businesses. There's so many other different organizations. I spoke at one that was really cool, which was BO. I think it was Black-owned women. And it was a group of Black-owned women that were looking at federal contracting, and so it behooves me to build relationships with all types of groups and industry partners, so that we can understand what the market needs, and we can also provide information, right? Every year we do the Asian Chamber of Commerce. Susan Allen there. We meet with them, so we can make sure we understand what some of the challenges are, right? Sometimes I learn a lot about culture and how we need to engage, so that we can reduce the barriers we can the best way possible. We provide a lot of training and guidance, but I think the one thing that's the most important is the bottom one, which is each of our program offices, we facilitate small business goals with them. And we're constantly meeting with them to help them to understand the importance of small business, but we also give them strategies to be successful. And so these are really core things that small business offices should be doing, right? Now, is it possible that you could find someone who isn't doing this? That's possible. Is there a possibility that that there's more people that are willing to do the right thing and to support you? My money's on that one, right? I think there's a lot of great people in this field that are really passionate about small businesses, and they are really, really, really engaged. And so I always say that there may be some discouragement. I'm not gonna be dismissive of that. There could be some discouragement that you may face when trying to engage, but I guarantee you there's going to be a lot of people that will give you encouragement and give you a sense of this isn't within the realm of possibility. So I add this in every once in a while just because I think it's kind of interesting, because a lot of people don't know what resources are available. So I put this out here. right? So a lot of people know, almost everybody knows, right, of the Small Business Administration and its importance, right? Funding, contracting, they do it all, right? But there are other resources that are there, right? So once you, and I use this model, this is unofficial. Hopefully Yasmin is okay with this, but this is just this is how I think, right? And so small business administration is always the first start, right? You get your certifications, figure out what lending. If you need lending, you always want to establish lending and financing and all those things before you even get to a contract. Because the last thing you want is what's standing in between of you and opportunity is a funding mechanism, right? And so I always say SBA, Small Business Administration, first place to start. Apex Accelerator is the next place to start. Apex Accelerators, the artists formerly known as PTech, are really, really the unsung heroes of the federal government. These are people who are generally attached to universities. They're generally engaging small businesses. They generally know where a lot of the resources are. So much so that sometimes I tell people when they're first starting that you really don't want to start with me, right? Because I'm only going to give you a very narrow scope from my perspective. SBA, Apex Accelerators are going to give you a much broader perspective of what contracting looks like. Because I'm only going to see things from my vantage point. But I always say this is good as you're starting to build, right? I think it's also good if you are a minority-owned small business, or if you're not a minority-owned business, to leverage some of the resources. Now, I put MDA in there. That's a Department of Commerce resource. There are other resources that are similar to this. One is, oh goodness, I just drew a blank. I'm sorry. There is forget the name of it. It's going to come to me where you have former small businesses that are that mentor. I cannot remember the name. I'll
School?
put, what is it?
School?
Score. Yeah, thank you. Score. Let me put it in there. And Score is another good resource. They really provide some good mentorship, some really good support. And then, of course, once you've engaged them, I think some other. So if you have any veterans that are on the call, there's a really good resource. It's called Veterans. It's called Veterans in Procurement, or Veterans Institute Procurement, or Veterans. Yeah, VIP. I'm gonna put it in here. VIP, and it's through Montgomery County. And you may say to yourself, well, I don't live in Montgomery County, or why would I be involved in Montgomery County? But this is actually a program that is actually free of charge. And there's like all over, like you can be, there's people from Texas, there's people from Florida. I think one time that I went, the one time I went there, there were 10 businesses from Texas, right? And what they do is, if you can get to their location, they'll give you lodging, they will feed you, and they will train you. I can't think of a better deal than that, right? Especially the feed you part, because the food's pretty good. I know that for sure. But these are some resources, and I think these resources are good to know. I see there's some other resources that have been put in the chat. If there's any that I forgot that you may have personally benefited from, and you want to put it in the chat for the other participants, please feel free. And then it comes to us as the Office of Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization, where we are here to support you in the actual work of finding opportunities, right? I always say it's better if you kind of know what we're doing, if you kind of know what we're buying, because sometimes I'll get someone and they'll say, hey, Calvin, I'm a construction company, or I'm a roofing company. I'm looking for opportunities at Department of Education. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, but I can't help you because we don't do construction. We definitely don't do roofing. And so, oftentimes it's a disappointing conversation, right? But I always say if that person had at least touched one of those resources before they got to the OSDBU, they probably would have known that, right? The Apex Accelerator provides such good information, and they're really engaging in the community, and they generally have a lot of good relationships with the customers in which you want to engage. All right. So let's move on to the next slide. And so the things that I'm going to share with you are going to be things that you can take other places. And so what I mean by that is the same way that we're looking at spend data, the same way we're going to look at like a segmentation strategy. You can do the very same thing with every other agency. In fact, I would encourage you to do so because this is a good way for you to understand how to do market research, and how to take that market research and actually apply it to a strategy that will help you to grow, right? Oftentimes I've sat on panels and people say, well, you got to do your homework. Wait, am I not sharing the presentation? I just saw somebody say, am I sharing a presentation? Jasmine, do you see the presentation? I'm sorry, say it one more time.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think anybody else is having a problem, so maybe it's
Okay.
your Wi-Fi connection.
Okay. All right. Cool. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't moving forward without everybody. Okay. So there's a lot of information you can learn from the spend data, right? So if you're looking for resources to get the spend data, Federal Procurement Data System, FPDS, is a good resource. There's also so FPDS is now in SAM, System for Award Management. USA Spend can give you some really good information. Those are all free resources. Now, there are other resources that cost money, and it's totally up to you if you want to make that investment. I would always say try the free resources first and see if you can get some of the information that you need. You'll also see the breakdown, and I always demonstrate this because these are the key small business set-aside categories that we have in the federal government. So small business is, of course, the high level. That's everybody who's categorized as a small business. And small business is generally categorized by either size in terms of a number of employees or by dollars over a 5-year period. What is the actual revenue? Then you see that then there's the SDVOSB, that's the Service Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Business. A lot of people are surprised that we actually, if you're a veteran-owned small business, that we don't get prime credit for you, right? So it's a prime contract, which is directly a contract with the government, and then it's a subcontract, which is you're on a contract with another company, and that other company is directing to us. So you're subcontracting to a prime contractor who has a relationship with the government. Most people are often surprised that we don't have a veteran-owned small business set-aside preference. And the only time that does come into play is in subcontracting. In the subcontracting, under FAR Part 19, there is a category for veteran-owned small business in which we can get veteran-owned small business credit, but we don't get the veteran-owned small business credit within the Service Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Business. And that really means, I use my dad as an example. My dad is 100% disabled veteran, and many of you may know that not all scars are visible. A lot of my dad's scars are not visible to the eyes, even though he does have his Vietnam veteran scarf on his back from where he was wounded. But again, not all scars are seen, and that also feeds into disability status. But service disabled veteran-owned small business is a status. The other one is probably one of my favorites, which is the hub zone which is a historically underutilized business zone. I grew up in a small town that had I would say maybe 5 or 6 key employers that basically employed everybody. Um, the first one left, which was Chung King, which you may remember eating some of their products when you were coming up, either as an adult or a child. They used to sell Chinese Asian foods. Well, that they packed up and moved away. Then we had what was called Air Packs. Air Packs packed up and moved away. Then we had what was called Cold Water. And so on the eastern shore of Maryland, seafood is king next to agriculture. And so they would pack seafood, and that seafood would be sent all over the place. That closed as well. And so the devastation left behind from some of these larger corporations leaving the town left us with unemployment issues, with poverty issues, and the like. And as such, that my hometown in Dorchester County would be or is designated as a hub zone, historically underutilized business zone. The way it works is if you establish your company in a hub zone and hire at least 35% from a hub zone, you get a 3%. There's a 3% goal for agencies to hit to try to get contracts to those hub zone companies. And so that's a very important program, and it's a good way to really get a competitive edge, but also be able to reinvest in the community. There's other incentives too in that program. There's a 10% price differential in the competitive contracts. Next is the Women-Owned Small Business Program. There's the Women-Owned Small Business Program, and then there's the ED, the Economically Disadvantaged Women-Owned Small Business Program. But in most cases, the Women-Owned Small Business Program is the, if you will, the tier that we generally reflect. And that's a woman-owned small business that is wholly owned by a women-owned small business, owned and operated. So no, your husband can't run it and you not be involved. No, we want women-owned small businesses that are the ones that are running the companies. And now I'm so glad because SBA has really done a lot because it creates an unfair advantage, right? And so now they have some safeguards to make sure that the women, because there are so many great women-owned small businesses that are leading and running companies, and they can run circles around everybody, right? But it's good to see that they're really putting some provisions in to make sure that they keep the integrity of the program. That's a 5% goal. The service disabled veteran-owned small business goal, I neglected to tell you, the beginning of this fiscal year changed from 3 to 5%. So I need to update my slide. That was updated through the National Defense Authorization Act just recently. And then lastly is the small disadvantaged business goal. And so that is the 8A program. Most people are familiar with Section 8A of the Small Business Act, which allows you to get a sole source contract up to $4.5 million. If you are individually owned small disadvantaged business. There's also what's called a tribal small disadvantaged business, and these are this goes all the way back to the Native American or the Indian Act, I think is the term that they used at the time. And what it really does is give a preferential treatment to tribes who incorporate and gives them the ability to enter into contracts in the sole source environment as well. And that threshold is 25 million for civilian. It goes to 100 million if you are on the DoD side. So there are government-wide contracts. I give this information so you can kind of see where we spend in terms of some of these government-wide contracts. Some people also call them best-in-class contracts. Most of these contracts would be traditionally classified by most people as the government-wide acquisitions contracts. And so the term is GWAC that you may hear. And so the GWAC is a little bit different from the schedules program, and I'll talk about both in a little bit. But these are generally government-wide contracts that everybody can use. The benefits of these contracts are, if you can get onto them, gives you a lot of opportunity to participate across the federal government. The GSA schedule or the schedules program, or they also refer to them as the federal supply schedule, are also another contract vehicle that's often used. But there is a policy. Policy is called category management, and category management is this: hey, government, you need to buy more like a enterprise, right? And not buy in ways that is disjointed or not logical, right? And really, the intent of the policy makes sense because there are times when I remember we would build IDIQ contracts, even blanket purchase order agreements. IDIQ is indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts. They're under Federal Acquisition Regulation Part 16, and then the blanket purchase agreements can be done two ways. One is through Federal Acquisition Regulation 13, and which is more commonly done is through Federal Acquisition Regulation Part 8. So the Federal Acquisition Regulation is what we call our Bible or our guidebook that really governs all federal procurement acquisitions. And so when you go through that, you can see kind of what these vehicles are. And so the GWACs, or the government-wide acquisition contracts, are generally done through FAR Part 16, or Federal Acquisition Regulation Part 16. The good thing about that is what's called fair opportunity, which means if you're on that contract, everybody gets a chance to see the proposals that are put on the contract. On the flip side, on the GSA schedule or General Service Administration schedule contracts are Federal Acquisition Regulation Part 8. And the way it works is you need just 3 quotes or 3 companies to set aside a contract. And the reason why I'm telling you these rules is so if you are in the market and you are trying to advocate, and maybe you're on a schedule and you may not be familiar with the rule of 3, if you will, for schedules, and you may be chuckling to yourself because generally you hear in Federal Acquisition Regulation Part 19, where the preponderance of small business regulations are, it tells us the rule of 2 is if there's 2 or more companies, they're able to do the requirement, it should be set aside. But in the schedules program, because it's a different authority, it's 3. So here's the overview of spending by North American Industry Classification Code. I always say that your NAICS code is really your key because it's going to help you to determine, when you're figuring out your segmentation strategy, where you want to go, who's buying what you're selling, and what percentage of that spend is going to small business, what percentage of that spend is going to large business, and then you can infer whether or not this is truly a marketplace. So I want to give this as a snapshot, an example, so you can kind of understand our data, but also understand other data as well as you're looking at other agencies. The first NAICS code at the top, other activities related to credit intermediation. Now you may say to yourself, you guys stink. You're not doing anything in small business for this program. And you could be right, but there also is something else to consider. This NAICS code, or this North American Industry Classification Code, is generally used for NELNET, for Ed Financial, for a lot of the larger servicers that are responsible for student loans, or for the student financing process, I should say. Right. So there tend to not be a lot of small businesses that are doing it. Not to say that there's not any, But the way that the business model of the Department of Education, they have these large, they call them front end servicers that they're working with. And so if you were under that NAICS code and you looked and you said, oh, well, maybe they don't care about small business. And I would challenge you to say, what is the reason why they're not utilizing small business? And is there an opportunity for me to change what the existing strategy is? Because if I was able to come to them and say, hey, you know what? We got like 10 businesses that are doing this work. Now, maybe they may not be able to handle $1.1 billion, but maybe they can handle $100 million of a portfolio. And we look at how we can break this contract up in a way that the students can get the services they need, and we can still support small businesses and be able to build our industrial base. Right. And so you can look at some of these codes and you can kind of see where we spend and the percentages. And oftentimes this can give you some indication. Now, the nuance part is you may not know where the money's going, right? Or why the distribution is that way. And this is a question that you would have for your OSDBU. Hey, you know what? I'm in other activities related to credit and intermediation. I just have a question of why there's no spend going to small business. And the program office, I'm at the OSDBU office would know, right? And they would tell you, hey, you know what? We've been trying to work on that, right? And there's a lot of subcontracting opportunities, but not a lot of prime opportunities. Okay, right? So it helps you to know how to navigate, let you know how to engage the customer in such a way where you may be successful. All right. All right. So this again is some of the small business NAICS codes. And so so you may say, kind of why are you in 21 and 22? We're in 24. I wanted to use this slide because the 22 numbers are very similar to 23, but I also wanted to show you why knowing the data is helpful in terms of what opportunity is available and what opportunity may not be available. So these were our top small business NAICS codes, or North American Industry Classification System, for 21. And you can see collection agency contracts were our largest spend, quite a bit of spend, right? There's other computer-related services and administrative management made up our top 3 NAICS codes for the Department of Education. Now look at 22. Who remembers what the top NAICS code was? Just put it in the chat. Who remembers what that top NAICS code was? Do you remember? Yeah. Good job, Kira. It was collection, but you don't see it there anymore, right? So what if you put all your resources into pursuing an FY22 contract at Department of Education for collection services? Because we're spending a tons of money there. You would probably be well informed, right? Because in 22 and 23 it's the same thing. 24 is the same thing. They're no longer in this top. Now, what happened, right? So this is where it comes into the data is good, but at some point you got to fill in the gaps, right? You got to fill in the gaps of what's happening so that you can understand how to approach or where there may be opportunities, right? So the Department of Education, if you remember, there was the CARES Act during COVID. The CARES Act during COVID said, hey, if you got student loans, you don't have to pay it because we're all hurting right now. No, I didn't say that precisely. It's Calvin paraphrasing, right? And so what subsequently happened was people didn't have to pay the student loans. Well, new administration comes in and says, you know what? I don't like agencies having debt collection contracts. I think I'm going to do away with it. And so that's what they did. They said, not only we're going to do away with this contract, we're also going to figure out ways to forgive loans, right? So these things make a difference. They're policy issues, but they also make a difference, right? Because now this impacts this contract, which, oh, by the way, was a small business contract that was a lot of money, right? And now there's a different direction that the agency has gone. And now a lot of those opportunities are not there anymore, right? So that's why it's important to understand the environment, understand what's happening in terms of small business spend. All right. Okay. So these are our program offices. So generally federal contracting, program offices, and contracting offices. So these are the top program offices where we spend the most dollars. And you can kind of see the trends. I always say at least look at a 3-year trend, at least a 3-year trend. If you're able to do further, like a 5-year, it's even better. So you can kind of see if there's ebbs or flows, if there's any anomalies in data. For instance, if you were working for if you were trying to work with the Department of Army, here's a fun fact, right? You're working for the Department of Army and you have your eyes on a small military base. A little intermission. All right, let's get back on it. So here's this. So I wanted to transition over to. You can see the screen, okay? Because I want to leave some.
Yes, yeah.
So I want to show you guys a little something that I'm doing that you may be able to implement yourself. But what I'm doing is I'm looking at our contracts, and we're looking at all the contracts that are like the top spenders, like some of the NAICs codes that you saw where we're spending the most money. We're looking at the contracts. We're looking at the industry base and trying to figure out if there's enough industry that we can try to pursue those contracts. And so we're pursuing them in some different ways. Do we need to re-look at the scope? Do we need to just put it out for small businesses and try to figure out ways to get more small businesses involved? And so our dashboard uses the information from the NAICS codes to see where there are opportunities for small businesses. And the reason why I'm showing you this is so that you can do something similar for yourself, right? As you're looking for opportunities, you want to look at these NAICS codes and how the agencies are performing against some of these NAICS codes, some of these industry codes. Now, again, I would ask specific questions. Are you struggling with HubZone businesses because you can't find any? Are you struggling with HubZone businesses because the program offices just aren't using them, right? And these are some of the questions that you would ask your OSDBU directors or your OSDBU staff. There's just 2 quick things. If you can spend some time reading Executive Order 13985, M2203, and M2311, because they have been significant pieces of policy that's really helped to maximize more opportunities for small businesses. In times where I thought there were probably no opportunities for small businesses, we're seeing opportunities cultivating themselves. Those policies are major drivers. So you may also want to go to other agencies, say, hey, in which way and what kind of ways are you implementing some of these policies, and how are they helping you to drive change in terms of getting small businesses opportunities? All right. And this is some resources that are available. And I can, again, I'll send you guys this, I'll send Yasmin the slides so that you have them. And it also has the contact information. I'll put the email addresses in here before I send it. But let me stop so you guys might have questions, and I want to make sure there's times for questions.
Thank you, Calvin. That was a great presentation. Okay, so yeah, we've got a couple of minutes left. So if you would like Calvin to answer any questions or go over anything he mentioned earlier, please type it in the chat box. The question has popped up, says, will the slides be made available? Yes, I will be sending out the slides and the recording shortly after the webinar. First question is from Scott. What types of things would come under finance and operations?
Yeah, so they are, I call them the overhead of the department. So we have HR, we have budget, we have we have our like a business systems, right? So there's some IT work there. There's training. Our equal opportunity offices is under is under that group. So there's a lot of different services, mostly professional services, if I would have to guess which one. But there are a lot of IT services that are there too, because it's in support of other services throughout the department. Good question.
Somebody said, can you show the contact slide again?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I don't have the emails, but I'll bring it up anyway.
Okay.
I'll bring it up anyway. I realized, that the names are less helpful without the emails,
All
and
right.
I don't want to withhold that information. So let me bring that back up again.
All right, great. Thank you. So yeah, like I said, I am going to be sending out the slides shortly, so you'll be able to review this again in your own time. Next question is from Sandy. He asks, thank you for providing tremendous insights. We've done a lot of work for DHS, but as a subcontractor, to the point that the prime doesn't even have to worry about managing the contract, which is good. We've managed everything from soup to nuts, but our biggest hurdle is submitting a prime pass performance. Does the Department of Education have a similar requirement?
Yes, so we do have a past performance requirement. That past performance requirement I'm trying to minimize. So typically, if you have no past performance, you're actually rated as neutral, right? You're not positive nor negative. You cannot be dinged. So if you ever have a debrief and they say your past performance is a problem, I would raise the concern and have them explain it even more. It should be neutral. There is a new regulation that allows for small businesses, when you are a subcontractor, to get the credit of the subcontracting credit for that performance. What you do is you reach out to your the prime. They send a rating sheet, and you can include that in your proposal. That's a new change that I think is very helpful. But yeah, I think past performance sometimes becomes a barrier, especially when it's like, hey, you got to have past performance with education or past performance with HHS, and you never worked there, right? So those are things that we're trying to change because we see them as great barriers, and we miss out on a lot of good companies because of that.
I do have to apologize. I'm working from my home office today, and of course, they've decided to cut the grass right now. So sorry about that noise. We have one more question. It's about the veterans, and says, can you go over that comment you made about veterans not being part of prime contracts, but more subs, and also the VOSB and their percentage of work in your department?
Yeah. So that in the regulations, we get credit, if you will, right? So we get credit, small business credit, for every dollar that goes towards service disabled veteran-owned small businesses, right? Now the problem is not all veteran-owned small businesses are service disabled veteran-owned small businesses, because we technically we do not have a set aside here at the Department of Education or most federal agencies except VA. And if you are a veteran, I would look up Kingdomware decision and the VA. Otherwise, it's service disabled veteran is a classification. The only way we do get credit for a veteran-owned small business who is not service disabled is through subcontracting. And in the subcontracting plans, that we have a percentage for veteran-owned small business, in which if the prime contractor uses a veteran-owned small business, that subcontracting credit is passed through.
That's all we have time for today. So I'd like to thank Calvin so much for doing this today, and for all of you for showing up and persevering with our technical issues, and being patient with us and staying to the end. I'm going to send out the recording and the presentation. And if they have any follow-up questions, Calvin, can they reach out to you or another
Sure.
member of
Yeah,
your
it's not a
team?
problem. I'm not as responsive as I used to be because I have now two jobs. So just be patient with me. I will promise I will try to get back to you as soon as possible. Okay.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much again. Thanks, everybody. And we hope to see you at a future Apex Accelerator event.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.